Huawei's rise, ban, and global comeback explained. Just a few years ago, Huawei was everywhere, outselling giants, shaping the future of smartphones, and challenging Silicon Valley itself. Then, almost overnight, it was cut off from the world. No Google, no key chips, no clear future. Many thought this was the end. But Huawei didn't disappear. It adapted, rebuilt, and quietly started rising again. So how did one of the most powerful tech companies survive a global ban and stage a comeback no one expected? This is the full story of Huawei's rise, fall, and return to the global stage. 10. The humble beginning. Huawei's story didn't begin with massive funding, global fame, or flashy products. It began in 1987 in a small office with Ren Zhengfei, a former engineer who believed that communication technology would shape the future of the world. At that time, the telecom industry was dominated by established international giants, and local players had little influence. Most countries, including China, depended heavily on imported equipment, leaving very little room for domestic innovation. Huawei started with something incredibly basic: reselling telephone switches. There was no breakthrough product, no media attention, and no shortcuts. The early team spent long hours studying how existing systems worked, fixing problems for clients, and slowly building technical know-how from real-world experience. Every project became a lesson. What truly set Huawei apart was its mindset. While others chased fast growth and quick profits, Huawei chose patience. A large portion of its earnings was poured back into research and development, even when the company was still small. This wasn't an easy decision. It slowed short-term success, but it laid the foundation for something much bigger. Ren Zhengfei believed that if Huawei mastered core technology instead of copying it, the company could one day stand on equal ground with global leaders. That belief shaped Huawei's culture: relentless learning, long-term thinking, and a refusal to depend on others for critical technology. What looked like a modest beginning was actually the blueprint for a future tech giant. 9. Building a global tech powerhouse. By the early 2000s, Huawei had outgrown its startup phase and was ready to take a bold step onto the global stage. Instead of competing head-to-head in already crowded premium markets, Huawei targeted regions that were often overlooked. It offered telecom equipment that was not only more affordable, but also quicker to install and easier to customize for local needs. For network providers trying to expand coverage fast, Huawei became an attractive alternative. As Huawei's international footprint expanded across Asia, Europe, Africa, and Latin America, one thing became clear: this company wasn't cutting corners. A huge portion of its revenue was funneled straight back into research and development, often at levels higher than many long-established rivals. This relentless investment allowed Huawei to move faster than the industry, shaping the future of mobile connectivity rather than simply following it. Huawei engineers played a major role in advancing 4G technology and later became key contributors to the global rollout of 5G networks. At the same time, the company was quietly building strength in cloud services, enterprise solutions, and consumer electronics. It was no longer just a network supplier. It was becoming a full-scale technology powerhouse. Then came the turning point. Huawei entered the smartphone market with a clear strategy: combine cutting-edge hardware, premium design, and aggressive pricing. What began as an experiment quickly turned into a global challenge to the biggest names in the industry. This move didn't just change Huawei's business, it reshaped its identity and set the stage for everything that followed. 8. The smartphone revolution. Huawei didn't enter the smartphone market with loud promises or bold headlines. In the beginning, its phones were mostly seen as practical and affordable, reliable but not exciting. That perception didn't last long. Behind the scenes, Huawei was preparing something much bigger. The company began forming key partnerships, investing heavily in chip design, and focusing on features that users actually cared about, not just specs on paper. One of Huawei's biggest breakthroughs came in mobile photography. By working closely with global camera experts, Huawei turned smartphones into powerful imaging tools. Night photography, advanced zoom, and AI-powered image processing suddenly became selling points where Huawei often led the conversation. At the same time, its devices offered strong battery life, fast charging, and flagship-level performance, often at prices lower than competitors. Huawei also made a bold move by designing its own smartphone processors. This gave the company tighter control over performance, efficiency, and long-term innovation. Each new launch felt more confident, more premium, and more competitive. Slowly, consumer perception shifted. Huawei was no longer an alternative, it was a serious contender. By 2019, the results were undeniable. Huawei had climbed to the top tier of global smartphone brands, even surpassing long-established rivals in total shipments. For a moment, it looked like nothing could slow this rise. But just as Huawei reached its peak, unseen forces were moving in the background, and the biggest challenge in the company's history was about to begin. 6. The global ban that changed everything. In 2019, Huawei's rise came to a sudden and dramatic halt. Almost overnight, the company was placed under strict restrictions that cut it off from some of the most critical technologies in the modern tech industry. Access to advanced chip manufacturing, key software platforms, and essential components was suddenly gone. For a company built on cutting-edge innovation, the shock was massive. The smartphone business felt the impact immediately. New Huawei phones could no longer ship with widely used mobile services that millions of users around the world relied on every day. For consumers outside Huawei's core markets, this was a deal-breaker. At the same time, supply chains that had taken years to perfect were thrown into chaos. Production slowed, product launches were delayed, and global sales dropped sharply within months. Industry analysts were quick to write Huawei off. Many predicted that its smartphone division would collapse completely. Some even believed Huawei would disappear as a consumer brand, becoming a cautionary tale of how quickly a global tech giant could fall. But inside Huawei, this wasn't seen as the end, it was a turning point. The company faced a defining choice: surrender its global ambitions or rebuild itself under pressure. What followed wasn't just damage control, but one of the most intense reinvention efforts the tech world had ever seen. Huawei chose to adapt, knowing that its survival and legacy depended on it. 4. Reinvention under pressure. When many expected Huawei to retreat, the company did the opposite. It turned inward and began rebuilding itself from the ground up. The restrictions had exposed a hard reality. Dependence on external technology was a long-term risk. Huawei responded with urgency, focus, and an all-in commitment to self-reliance. One of the first moves was accelerating the development of its own operating system. What began as a contingency plan quickly evolved into a full ecosystem strategy. Huawei invested heavily in tools, services, and incentives to attract developers, knowing that software ecosystems don't succeed on technology alone. The goal wasn't to replace anything overnight, but to create a platform that could stand on its own over time. Every update, every feature, was built with long-term independence in mind. At the same time, Huawei reshaped its entire business structure. While international smartphone sales faced pressure, other divisions stepped into the spotlight. Telecom infrastructure remained strong, supported by years of expertise and global partnerships. Cloud computing, enterprise solutions, and digital energy rapidly grew into major revenue drivers, reducing Huawei's reliance on consumer devices. Behind the scenes, Huawei pushed harder than ever on chip design, software optimization, and hardware innovation, even with limited access to advanced manufacturing. Engineers were forced to rethink efficiency, design smarter systems, and extract more performance from fewer resources. This phase wasn't about maintaining old success. It was about becoming a different, stronger company. Huawei wasn't just surviving, it was reinventing itself under pressure. 3. The comeback begins. After years of uncertainty, signs of Huawei's comeback began to appear. Slowly at first, then with growing confidence. In markets where brand loyalty was strong and its ecosystem had taken root, users didn't walk away. Instead, they adapted alongside the company. Huawei responded by refining its products, focusing on what it could fully control: performance, design, and seamless integration across devices. Each new launch felt more focused, more intentional, and less dependent on external platforms. Huawei also made a critical strategic shift. Rather than betting everything on smartphones, it expanded aggressively into other product categories. Wearables became smarter and more health-focused. Laptops and tablets were redesigned for deeper ecosystem connectivity. Smart home devices began working together smoothly, and Huawei entered automotive technology, positioning itself as a software and hardware partner for the future of connected vehicles. The vision was clear: build an ecosystem so integrated that the whole was more powerful than any single product. Meanwhile, Huawei never lost its strength in telecom. While headlines focused on its smartphone struggles, the company quietly remained a global leader in network technology and infrastructure. Decades of experience, deep engineering talent, and continued innovation kept Huawei at the center of next-generation connectivity. The company that many had written off was still standing. More importantly, it was evolving, not back into what it once was, but into something more resilient, more diversified, and built for the long run. 2. What Huawei's story really means. Huawei's story goes far beyond smartphones, networks, or market share. At its core, it's a lesson in resilience, about what happens when a company is pushed into a corner and forced to rethink everything it once depended on. In an industry where most players rely heavily on shared platforms, global supply chains, and external ecosystems, Huawei's situation was a stress test few companies could survive. What makes Huawei's journey remarkable is the scale of its response. Instead of shrinking its ambitions, it doubled down on long-term thinking. It chose to invest in self-reliance, even when the cost was enormous and the payoff uncertain. Building independent software, redesigning hardware strategies, and restructuring entire business divisions isn't something that happens quickly or easily. Yet Huawei committed to it under extreme pressure. Its comeback doesn't look like the peak years when its smartphones dominated headlines. And that's the point. Huawei evolved. It became more diversified, more disciplined, and more focused on foundational technology. As an infrastructure leader, it continues shaping global connectivity. As an ecosystem builder, it's creating tightly integrated products designed to last. Huawei's influence may be quieter today, but it's still powerful. And its story sends a clear message to the tech world. True strength isn't just about rapid growth, it's about endurance. Huawei didn't vanish. It adapted, transformed, and proved that refusing to disappear can be the strongest strategy of all. 1. Final thoughts. Huawei's journey feels almost cinematic. Its rise was fast, bold, and impossible to ignore. In a short span of time, it went from being an underdog to standing shoulder to shoulder with the biggest names in global technology. Then came the fall, sudden, public, and unforgiving. Restrictions, lost partnerships, and a collapsing consumer business created the impression that Huawei's story had reached its final chapter. Many believed the company had already peaked, but what makes Huawei truly fascinating is what happened next. Instead of chasing its past success, Huawei chose to redefine itself. It shifted focus from headlines to foundations, from rapid expansion to long-term survival. It invested in core technologies, built new ecosystems, and diversified its business in ways that made it less dependent on any single product or market. This wasn't a quick rebound. It was a slow, deliberate transformation. Today, Huawei stands as a reminder that setbacks don't always signal the end. Sometimes, they mark a turning point. As global technology continues to evolve and competition grows even more intense, Huawei's path raises a powerful question. Is this simply a recovery from one of the toughest challenges in tech history, or the beginning of an entirely new era for a company that refused to stay down? If Huawei's story surprised you, wait till you see what happened with other tech giants. On the screen right now is a deep dive into Vivo's master plan and how it quietly rose in the smartphone world. Or you can check out LG's unbelievable journey, a company that built a billion-dollar empire and then walked away from smartphones entirely. Click one of them, and I'll see you in the next video.